Hi, Blue Wire listeners. I'm Greg Olson. I'm excited to partner with Blue Wire to bring you TE1, a podcast where I interview the tight ends who have revolutionized the position. Listen in as I have raw, in-depth conversations with the all-time greats like Shannon Sharpe, Tony Gonzalez, Travis Kelce, and George Kittle. We'll explore how the tight end position has changed over the last 60 years and what it takes to be the very best. Subscribe to TE1 from Blue Wire Studios today so you're ready for the August premiere.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hardwood Knocks. This is Adam Frommel here with my co-host Dan Favale, and today we're going to be going over some awards, both real and fake, for the NBA's Bubble experience in Florida. We'll be going over our first and second team all bubble, our typical awards, the coach of the bubble, the most improved player of the bubble, the MVP of the bubble, etc., and then some fun ones that we've generated to sort of spark a little conversation here. But before we get into that, a couple of shout outs. First to our sponsors, NFL Sunday Ticket, Deal Dash, and BetOnline.ag, without whom this podcast would not be possible. Second, to anyone who has subscribed, rated, and reviewed, etc., anything that you have done to help out this podcast, it is very much appreciated. If you haven't yet, please do that on whatever provider you are getting your podcasts from. And third, to Dan, who's about to tell us how he's doing today.
That was a hell of an intro. Nice and succinct. Under a minute.
I'm getting better. I'm getting better.
Yeah, you're like back in the groove.
Perfect or something. Yeah.
I'm doing swell over here. I'm ready to talk about some bubble awards. It's just funny that you use the word typical because nothing about this is actually typical.
I'm just trying to pretend.
How are you doing though?
I'm doing pretty well. We're recording this just before the 2 p.m. or 2 p.m. Mountain Time. Is it 2 p.m. Mountain Time or?
Yeah, 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
4 p.m. Eastern. I don't understand time zones anymore. Time is irrelevant in 2020. But yeah, we're recording this right before the big slate of Thursday games kicks off, and we get to figure out finally who is going to claim those number 8 and 9 seeds in the Western Conference, and I'm just excited to watch those games.
Yeah, I'm like a little bit annoyed that the Grizzlies and the Suns are playing at the same time, but I'll deal with it.
Yeah, at least we do have, like, there will be drama in the Portland-Brooklyn game at 9 p.m. Eastern.
Yes, correct. And so we are picking these awards before those games happen. If there are any situations where someone could do something to really change one of our picks, we'll obviously note that. But I don't think just because there are only a handful of teams actually playing for something in the games today that I can't envision these squads changing all that much.
It feels safe. And, just because Dan does 10 billion things every day and I'm trying to watch a toddler while working, like we have to do it at a certain time.
The timeline on this whole thing is weird because we just don't have a break to record the awards podcast. We don't have a break to do a playoff preview podcast. So it's like trying to squeeze everything in. It's wild, but I'm excited to do these awards. Can you guide us through them?
I can. So we're going to start off with the first team all bubble, which, Dan and I generated these separately and somehow managed to come up with the exact same 5 names. And that somehow is probably because almost everyone is going to have the same 5 names. And those are Damian Lillard, Devin Booker, James Harden, and TJ Warren, which feel like the absolute locks. And then we both had Kawhi Leonard in our 5th spot. And we should be clear that much like the all rookie teams, we are just not paying attention to positions with these.
Correct.
Exactly. As always, but in this case in particular.
Yeah, I don't know how you could build the team another way. I guess if you wanted to put, I'm trying to think of who would have a case for first team. I mean, Giannis.
I really considered Giannis. I did consider him.
Really,
he's
been
fantastic. Still, he did get suspended, and that was like basically the reason that I nudged him down below onto my second team. But he's been incredible in such limited minutes. It's a continuation of this MVP regular season, and I feel like somehow he's not getting enough credit.
He probably isn't, but I do think that volume kind of matters in the bubble because we're talking about such a small sample size. And so, if he's going to play sub 26 minutes per game and then miss 2 bubble games, I couldn't do it. I didn't even put him on my second team. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, he's still averaging 27.8 points, 12.2 rebounds, 4.2 assists, 1.3 blocks. He's shooting 62.6% from the field. He's playing phenomenal defense. He's doing everything, but yeah, I mean, and that's the issue, is that he's been so good for the last 2 years that I think it is easy to overlook the continued excellence.
And it's like, that's like one of the only reasons I have Kawhi in here too is he's played more minutes, and then he's just decided like, oh yeah, like I'll hit my pull-up three-pointers now after struggling.
When was the last time availability was cited as a positive reason for Kawhi Leonard?
Yeah, didn't play in every bubble game, but he's almost at 29 minutes per game. So that little oomph, coupled with him shooting almost 49% from deep, really, it did it for me. I mean, look, he couldn't stop Devin Booker on that game winner, so that's a fair assessment. James Harden's also just been ridiculous. He's only played in 5 bubble games, but 33.4 points, slashing 52, 33, 90, basically. And his workload is going to get is going to remain incredibly heavy because Russell Westbrook is going to miss the beginning of the first-round series with the Oklahoma City Thunder due to a quad strain, and that's going to be something to monitor that we'll obviously talk about when we're previewing playoff matchups. But he's just been quietly great, and he dropped like basically a 45-point triple-double the other day, and nobody cared, like because the games didn't really matter. But it's just like we're so numb to what he's doing too.
Yeah, I don't think we need to talk about Lillard and Booker quite yet because we will be getting to those two in a little bit down the road with a different award. So should we move on to the second team?
Yeah. Who did you have on yours?
So this is where it varies, and I actually just made a last-minute change because I can't believe that I forgot how ridiculous Luka Doncic has been, but I wanted to give him some credit for averaging a triple-double with 32 points, 11.3 assists, and 11 rebounds per game. The clutch offense has continued to not be great in Dallas, but he's been so excellent as an individual, as has Kristaps Porzingis, who I had joining him on the second team, along with Brook Lopez, Paul George, who has been absolutely locked in. It seems like he's returned to that Thunder level that he reached, and then Giannis.
So mine was similar, and I actually kind of, after we talked about him, regret a little bit not putting Giannis on here, but I didn't put Luka on here either, so at least I'm remaining consistent there. My second team was Derrick White, who's just been absolutely absurd, and I think some of the defensive workload that he's carried can help carry him over someone like Luka, who, look, the crunch time issues, they're still there in Dallas, and we got to do something about Luka's crunch time free throw percentage. 64.5% on the season, 62.5% in the bubble. Small sample size, but that's just weird. Under 17% from 3 in crunch time. So still amazing. Like you said, average a triple-double, a fair. But I'm nitpicking when it comes to the megastars is basically what I'm doing here. But I had Derrick White, Jason Tatum, Michael Porter Jr., Brook Lopez, who, you already put him on yours, just decided, I'm going to hit my threes too, was one of the worst wide-open three-point shooters in the league this year. By volume, he was probably the absolute worst when looking at his efficiency. And then he's shooting like 90% from 3 in the bubble. That's a slight exaggeration, but it's up there. And then I put Nicole Jokic, who he's been just an absolute monster, averaging over 9 assists per game, just throwing ridiculous passes. And they're not like these cheap passes like James Harden throws, Like they're actual real passes.
I had trouble with Jokic. I wanted to find a spot for him, but I ultimately didn't feel too compelled to do so just because the Nuggets haven't been playing to win every game. So he's been on the bench at the closing moments of contests. He hasn't played as much as you would expect, and he kind of failed to stand out as much as you might normally expect him to because of that. And just because there are so many great candidates for these spots.
Yeah, look, and if we're being honest, what we probably could have done, with the exception of Dame, Devin Booker, and Kawhi Leonard, just because they've played, you could, with the exception of Dame and Devin Booker and James Harden, because they've played so many minutes, we could have just said, look, superstars are playing limited minutes and resting games, no Kawhi, no Luka, no Giannis, like let's flesh out the teams from there. Maybe that would have been a more consistent way to do it, but that's what makes this interesting is because you can put people on here that normally wouldn't have a chance at making it. So I just took that opportunity, but Jokic still impressed me. I can't get over his passing, and I hope everyone caught the sarcasm in what I just said relative to James Harden's passing. If you did not, just Google Bill Simmons and you'll figure it out. Bill Simmons, James Harden, Luka Doncic, you'll figure it out.
So speaking of guys who might not normally get credit, we do have the out-of-nowhere team. And I'll let you lead that one off. We actually only have 2 players in common on these.
We're about to have another one because I decided to make the swap just because one of the players I picked initially, Javon Carter, he's not really doing anything that he didn't do during the regular season. His three-point clip is entirely unsustainable, but he was shooting okay from 3 and then trying to defend his ass off all year. It's been more effective. So shout out to him. But I picked Timothy Luau-Cabarrot, Cameron Payne, Gary Trent Jr., Keldon Johnson, and Bol Bol. The two that have probably surprised me the most, you could probably make a case that Gary Trent Jr. doesn't even belong on this team, but he's just done more stuff off the dribble for Portland, and he's averaging 17 points per game. Like, that's just absolutely bonkers to me. But TLC has surprised me. I don't think he's missed a corner three in the bubble, and again, that's obviously an exaggeration.
I'm not sure that one is an exaggeration.
That's also fair. But they might actually have like this longer term piece there. It's tough to gauge because you have Kyrie and KD, and you don't know. They're probably going to look to maybe trade for another star of the offseason, or you're going to be in like win now, let's acquire veteran mode, and TLC doesn't necessarily fit that. But in the bubble, 7 games, 14.1 points, slashing 50, 43, 90. 50, 43, 90. And just, again, I can't get over the three-point shooting. He's done some of it off the dribble, too. He's had some attacking when he puts the ball on the floor. You'd probably want him to be a better passer if you're going to have the ball in his hands that much, but he's just been super fun to watch. And then the other one that came out of nowhere, for me at least, was Keldon Johnson. Did not realize, I know that was his reputation in college, did not realize he was so sound defensively. Like, they're putting this guy on fours, and it's just working out. And he just doesn't miss wide open threes that he generates. And so that's been absolutely huge for San Antonio.
It has. I had two differences here. I wanted to give, I really wanted to give credit to Gary Trent Jr., and I did, as you'll see in a later award. But I felt like he had done enough before the bubble that it wasn't like totally out of nowhere, unlike what we've seen with both Darius Bazley and Grayson Allen. So Bazley for the Thunder, he's had 3 20-point games this year. They came on August 9th, August 10th, and August 12th. The role that he's taken on as this off-ball shooter there have been flashes of it throughout the season, but it's all coalesced in the bubble, and he's become like a legitimately valuable weapon for the Thunder, and yet another reason why they're going to be a dangerous team, regardless of who they're playing in the first and second round of the playoffs. Grayson Allen has kind of been a punchline for a while, dating back to his Duke days when he was stripping everyone left and right. But he has suddenly caught fire. He looks like a confident shooter. He's showing some shake off the dribble. He's showing some defensive chops. He's been a legitimately positive presence for a Memphis team that has had few of those, to be honest, during the bubble experience.
Yeah, he shot the 3-ball well, like all year, but what he's doing in the bubble, like now he's become essential too, because no Jaren Jackson Jr. Yeah. They like had to have him in closing lineups even before then. So I'm with you there. And Bol Bol obviously quite literally came out of nowhere because he didn't play during the regular season, had the left foot injury while he was a freshman in college last year. So yes, he definitely came out of nowhere, but the minutes have been, he's played over 15 minutes twice. And look, he's shown flashes of passing, being able to put the ball on the floor, of shooting, and he's very intriguing. And I will say, when I was power ranking team futures for the next 3 years, wildly underrated the Nuggets. I think I had them at 6 or 7. When we do our own, provided we don't know how long out into the distance we're going to look, I'm going to have to put them much higher just off of both what he and Michael Porter Jr. have shown.
And we did recently hear from TJ McBride, a Nuggets insider who is a friend of the podcast, that he does expect Bol Bol to actually get some playoff minutes, which I think is justification enough for the out-of-nowhere status, given that he has played so well in this limited action during the bubble that he might actually be a part of the Denver playoff rotation to some extent, even if it's minimal.
I wonder if those minutes are going to come alongside Jokic or Mason Plumlee, though, because that's
I want the super big lineup. I want the super big lineup.
That would be.
I want all three with Jeremy Grant.
That would have to be a troll at the end of a game that they're winning.
I feel like Mike Malone would do that too.
But also, look, there doesn't seem like they're going to have Gary Harris or Will Barton to start the playoffs unless something changes. So maybe they have to go big. Like they just don't have a choice now, even with Michael Porter Jr.
You've heard the phrase "go big or go home." They don't want to go home in the playoffs.
What's up next? We're getting to the regular awards now, right? Like the individual ones. Which one do you want to hit first?
We're going to start with the coach of the bubble. And for me, there were really only two choices here. Monty Williams from the Phoenix Suns and Greg Popovich from the San Antonio Spurs. I guess you could make a case for Jacque Vaughn with the Brooklyn Nets as well. But they felt more like a product of teams not taking them quite as seriously. I went with Popovich just because, as impressive as what the undefeated Suns have done is, they had more continuity moving into the bubble experience. They'd achieved some level of success when DeAndre Ayton was available. And the Spurs are having to overcome the absence of LaMarcus Aldridge, who has missed the entire bubble with shoulder surgery and will not play for the remainder of the season, however long that lasts for San Antonio. So just overcoming that level of adversity and getting such incredible contributions out of Keldon Johnson, out of Derrick White, out of DeMar DeRozan, out of everyone on that roster, except for probably Jakob Poeltl. That was enough to give him the slight edge here for me.
Yeah, the willingness to, I guess his hand was also kind of forced, but like we've seen, Derrick White and DeJounte Murray log some more time together, and so that certainly is going to help his case. And then like you said, the willingness though to just go to the younger kids or the younger players at all. Drew Eubanks too, getting minutes mostly because he has to, but you're sticking with him for stretches. I went with Monty Williams though. The Suns had like a 1% chance of making the play-in tournament entering the bubble. And to keep your players motivated and engaged when you're up against those type of odds, that's hard. It's hard to do in general, but the fact that the Suns are here, I'm not going to give him all the credit. Devin Booker's been incredible. Ricky Rubio's shooting out of his mind. DeAndre Ayton's been really good on defense. But the fact that the Suns just kept competing and are in the position that they're in as we record this, where some people, you already picked them to make the play-in tournament, that's just absolutely fantastic. And so I didn't really consider Greg Popovich as much as you did. I think he's a worthwhile choice. And again, you could go with Jacques Vaughn as well. But Monty Williams, look, through 7 games, just undefeated. And there's a chance Phoenix goes undefeated in the bubble. Potentially a strong chance, I think, when you look at who's going to actually play in the game. Who are they playing again? Are they against Utah today? I can't even remember.
They're playing Dallas. They're playing Dallas, yeah.
Dallas has no reason to compete in that game. So there's a strong chance they go undefeated, even if they don't. To be in this position at all, given where they were at the start, like that's pretty incredible.
It is. Yeah, I think the last point on Popovich is that he legitimately admitted going into the bubble experience that their purpose here was purely developmental, that he didn't expect to make the playoffs, that he didn't expect to win many games, that he was just trying to develop these young pieces, and he's done it so well that it's like the goals have changed.
And even just the way he's using Dario Saric too, it's like, maybe he won't become, maybe this isn't a role that Dario Saric is comfortable with long term, but you leaned all the way into bringing him off the bench and playing him a little bit at the 5, and he's played really well, particularly on offense. So so much credit goes to him. Sorry to interject there, but like it was just little nuts and bolts things like that, deciding to really lean into that with Dario Saric that I think ends up helping Phoenix a ton, because now Saric, who has been turned into the spot-up player ever since the Sixers got so deeper and the expectations became more immediate. Now he's able to kind of put the ball on the floor more and control more of the offensive outcome himself. And that's looked good on both him and Phoenix, who's been really desperate for that type of shot creation off the bench all year.
Ultimately, I don't think that there's a wrong chance between these two, which might be the first time in a long time that anyone has put the Suns and the Spurs on the same pedestal.
That is kind of typical, though, of any coach of the whatever talk. Whenever it's coach of the year, I always feel like there's at least like 3 to 5 candidates that you could pick, and it's not ridiculous.
Yeah, it's probably too, just because that award in particular seems to depend on expectations, not just performance. Like
right.
with MVP, it's just whoever performed the best. If someone surprised and performed the best versus performed the best according to expectations, like maybe there's a slight difference there, but not to the same extent that, if the favorite entering the season, the Milwaukee Bucks, right? If they win 60 games, ho hum. If the Suns win 60 games going into the season with lottery expectations, then they're going to be a lock for that kind of award.
Right.
So most improved player. We were in agreement on this one.
That's always fun, although that means there's nothing to debate. It has to be Derrick White, right? Like who?
Yeah, I guess you could give credit to like Michael Porter Jr. or any of our out of nowhere guys, I guess. But yeah, I mean, Derrick White has made the like star ascension.
Well, this will serve as a mea culpa, because I decided after picking Luka Doncic for the most improved player award, I realized that after not picking De'Aaron Fox last year like I wanted to because he was a sophomore, I have to go with Brandon Ingram for that award. So I'm doing the same thing here where, I probably could have considered Gary Trent Jr. too, but only in his second season. And so you default to year 3 Derrick White. What's been most impressive about him is just all of a sudden he's like, all right, yeah, I'll shoot a ton of threes. That's fine. Before the bubble, he's taking 3.9 3-point attempts per 36 minutes. In the bubble, that number is up to 9.7 3-point attempts per 36 minutes, on which he's shooting 39.3%. And so, he's averaging almost 23 points per 36 minutes as well to go with 6 assists. And he's getting to the free throw line more often than I expected to. We talked about this in, was it the playoff series against the Nuggets last year, where it was like, oh, Derrick White might be on the verge of a breakout. But I think lineup politics sort of got the best of him this season. But now he's going to be really pivotal if the Spurs want to make whatever transition they're making. If they want to make it smooth and quickly, he's just going to be huge, because I think you can make the case pretty easily that he's their most important non-Aldridge DeRozan game, because he's like a veteran basically at this point, but let's just say like prospect. I wouldn't consider him a prospect anymore, but I think even more so than Murray, he's their most important prospect right now.
Look, if you are a slot receiver in the NFL, you should want to go play for the New England Patriots, because you're going to improve. If you're a pitcher in the MLB, you should want to go pitch for Cleveland, because they're going to make the best of the situation. If you are a basketball player, regardless of position, you should want to go play for the Spurs, because Popovich is going to make you succeed on some level. And I think that's part of what we're seeing here, is like just the organization and the coaching just all coming together, plus the opportunity, and just the product is incredible. And I don't think any of us saw like this level of performance coming, and yet it also seems entirely reasonable and unsurprising, because it's the Spurs.
Right. And you could probably throw the Raptors on that level at this point, where you just trust that team is going to get the best out of you.
Yeah, we're definitely getting there for them.
That brings us to defensive player of the bubble.
It does. We did differ here. I went with Marc Gasol. The Toronto Raptors defense has been unbelievable. They're allowing 101.8 points per 100 possessions in the bubble. The second best is the Thunder at 107.1, then third is the Suns at 107.5. And Gasol has kind of spearheaded all of that. He's been everywhere. He's defended the interior well. He's shown increased mobility on the perimeter, maybe due in part to that weight loss that we've talked about in the past. It's been fantastic. It looks like he's in the middle of his athletic prime, and it's yet another reason that the Raptors are going to be an awfully tough out in the Eastern Conference.
That's like just another testament to how good they are, because he was just injured for such a huge chunk of the season, and that they had that caliber of a player on the bench for so long can then just come out in the bubble and be one of the defensive keystones of the league. I had Mikal Bridges finally starting in Phoenix. When you look at the type of assignments he's had to cover all bubble, you really have to give it up to him. And he's always just been super active. His arms go on forever. His closeouts are like teleportation. Good luck screening him or just getting by him. Just hustles so much on that end, and I almost feel like it's infectious. I used Cleaning the Glass to look at the how much the Suns were allowing per 100 possessions, and they're 7th outside of garbage time. They have the 6th best opponent effective field goal percentage. They've probably got a little bit lucky with the way their opponents are shooting threes, but also when you look at the way that Mikal Bridges is sort of forcing the ball out of guys' hands or contesting shots, maybe that's actually not so lucky. And so I went with him, and I wouldn't say that this is consensus, because like you said, Gasol would be a worthy pick there as well, but he's basically doing like an extended amount of what he's always done. It's just so it's more, and it's more consistent as well. And if you're a Suns fan, that has to get you excited, because you have Ayton, you have Booker, you know what Ricky Rubio is. That kind of makes Bridges like your largest swing piece. If he becomes like a all defense guy who can hit threes and put the ball on the floor, that doesn't make him an all-star, but that definitely changes the trajectory of your future.
And that's kind of what we expected when he was coming out of Villanova too. I think I don't remember. Were you as high on him as I was?
I was fine. I think I might have compared him to Chris Middleton when he was coming out, which probably ended up being
so that's
super
pretty
fun.
High on him, yeah.
But I didn't watch enough of him in college to know that he could do his playmaking off the dribble. It's been an underrated gem until now, where I feel like now it's just not a secret anymore.
Fair. So 6th man of the bubble was another award that we did differ on. I went with Gary Trent Jr., who has played 33.7 minutes per game, which is why this award is kind of dumb in general, because even though he's not starting games, like he's been a very crucial component of the Portland Trail Blazers lineups, even in crunch time situations. But he's been phenomenal. 17 points per game, shooting 52.6% from both the field and three-point range, which is largely because almost all of his shots are coming from three-point range. And even if that number is due to regress at some point, because no one is ever going to shoot over 50% from three at a high volume, it feels legitimate. It feels like this isn't just like some flash in the pan performance. He looks so much more confident both in spot up situations and off the dribble. He seems to understand like the best positioning in the half court set, where to go in transition. He's making more contributions on defense. It really feels like the Blazers have found this key piece who might give more of a window to the Lillard-McCollum combination.
You wish he was just like a little bit bigger so that he could do a better job defending wings, but he's so good that you can't be nitpicky. It's funny that he might be more important to their future now than Anthony Simons, who I think Blazers would have labeled as untouchable leading into the offseason. I'm with you, and I almost wanted to change my pick, but Jeremy Grant kind of swayed me here. His past few games, his offense, I think it's probably the best offensive stretch of his career.
Like, he was phenomenal last night, too.
I really just don't think that's a stretch. His last, you remove his first game in the bubble and just go to his last 5 games, he's averaging 22.6 points per 36 minutes, slashing 61, 41, and then 79 from the foul line. When they've run those like junky lineups, they've put the ball in his hands a little bit more, and he's like actually throwing some pretty cool passes. And then I don't think you want him. I'd be intrigued if they had more defensive wing talent of putting him at the 5, backup 5 minutes when Jokic isn't on the floor. And maybe he could still get away if you wanted to go Millsap and Jeremy Grant in the playoffs. But you probably don't want him as a back line defender, but he can really just muck up stuff on the perimeter. And he's had some tough assignments, particularly when you look at Gary Harris not being readily available for the Nuggets. So he really impressed me, and I kind of felt more comfortable going with him because you picked Gary Trent, so it felt like a license to diverge. But Gary Trent Jr. probably would come close to the consensus pick just based on he's been molten and just such a smart offensive player.
Look, it's funny that you say that you want to see Jeremy Grant at the 5 because I want to see him at the 2. I want to see him in that lineup with Mason Plumlee, Bol Bol, and Nicole Jokic. That's all I want.
So Jokic is the point guard in that scenario, which means you need like another. Do we just throw Michael Porter Jr. in that lineup too? And
Absolutely.
That's the big
Absolutely.
lineup. Okay.
That's the big lineup.
That's the one we're going to be tracking for the postseason.
It's going to happen. They're gonna outscore everyone by like 100 points per minute.
Speaking of the Nuggets, who's your Rob?
I mean, the rookie of the bubble is very obviously Michael Porter Jr. I think going in, it seemed like it was probably going to be Ja Morant or Zion Williamson as they were competing for those final spots in the Western Conference, but both have been disappointing. Zion had to play limited minutes at first. He was entirely apathetic on defense. Morant has struggled to maintain the same shooting percentages as his teammates have struggled around him, as Jaren Jackson Jr. hasn't been available. And Porter has just absolutely exploded. I'm not sure you really have to justify how good he's been because it's been so obvious to everyone watching. I mean, you had him on your second team all bubble.
Right. And I think even more of his offense is coming within the flow of things. He's shooting 42% on catch and shoot threes. He's just been he's a very good cutter. He's actually made some good defensive plays in the bubble. I'm curious to see how many minutes he actually does get in the playoffs because you're probably not going to have Barton and Harris to start. I think Mike Malone said he's going to be starting at this point. And I'm just curious to see how his shot making translates. I do think there's room for him to actually do more with the ball in his hands. Right now, pull-up jumpers in the bubble, yes, it really is only in the bubble. They've accounted for about 22% of his looks, and his effective field goal percentage is a blah blah 52.4%. But I actually think that he's hitting 43% of his pull-up threes, taking about 2 per game in the bubble. This might be another bailout option late in the shot clock. And I think Nicole Jokic, as while he's not a traditional crunch time option, he's just shown he can be. He's been so good in crunch time, not only this season, but as TJ McBride pointed out last season as well. He's been able to put the ball on the floor from face-up positions. He's not going to be as quick as a Jamal Murray, but now you also have Jamal Murray and a Michael Porter Jr. And so they just have a lot of late shot clock, late game options now.
I think sometimes it's easy to forget that Michael Porter Jr. was almost a consensus number 1 pick candidate before he started his collegiate career and had the back injuries at Missouri and played such limited minutes. Like this level of talent should not be surprising.
No, it shouldn't. And I'm almost a little bit shocked though because it feels like it's come together like more quickly than I would have expected, but this certainly is his ceiling. Like, it's not to say that, if this was the apex of Michael Porter Jr. or the arc, if you want to call it, that's not shocking. I think it's more so the team that he's on because the Nuggets are so good, and now they have this type of of swing piece for their future, this type of X factor.
Right.
And I'm interested to see how they handle this moving forward. They seem like a team that they're going to keep him, try and develop him, and make him that third star. And it's also going to become harder for them to make any impact trades because I don't know that any team's going to want to trade them a marquee player without getting MPJ back in return now. And so, look, that's a good problem to have, but it also is something that they're going to have to think about. Doesn't really have anything to do with the bubble, just that Michael Porter Jr. has played himself to that kind of outlook.
Yeah, I mean, and he really should be untouchable for that team. I can't imagine who they would move him for at this point, especially now that they're trusting him with these crunch time possessions.
It would have to be like someone who can't even
it.
think becoming available. Like, what if the Rockets decided to trade James Harden over the offseason?
Right.
It would have to be that type of scenario. And there are probably Nuggets fans that would push back against that because why are you going to take the ball out of Jokic's hands?
It would be an interesting conundrum for sure. But that feels like a little bit extreme of a hypothetical here.
MVP of the bubble.
MVP. It's a two-man conversation, right? It's between Devin Booker and Damian Lillard.
I put Devin Booker at first because I was like caught up in the Suns just moment, but it has to be Damian Lillard. Dropped 80 zillion points on the Mavericks the other night. But like, could we? I don't know. It depends on how much you want to weight intangibles in basketball. I do believe they're a thing. Just don't piss off Damian Lillard. Like, if you're an opponent, like, what are Paul George and Patrick Beverley doing now? Like, it hasn't come at their expense necessarily, but, don't poke the bear. He's averaging 37 points per game in the bubble while slashing 49, 41, 89. And he's taking 12.4 three-point attempts per game. I would hazard close to half those are from, 29 feet and out. And to see, the Mavericks the other night continue to play drop coverage against him was just funny because on July 15th, 1990, Damian Lillard was born in scoring range. He just came out, he came out of the womb and he was in scoring range. So I don't know how certain defenses are still not just going to trap him and then you have to figure out the rest after that. He's been absolutely spectacular, and that's not to say Devin Booker hasn't, but when I was looking at the numbers, this is more of a compliment to Devin Booker. What he's doing now is not that drastically different from what he's doing in the regular season. The difference is more people are paying attention, and he's definitely trying harder on defense off the ball. And that's always been the thing with him. It's like, if he was on a good team, maybe he wouldn't be an atrocious defender, and I think he's kind of proven that now. If you want to vote for him because you want to go best player on the best team in the bubble, perfectly fine. But Damian Lillard has been a cheat code's cheat code.
Yeah, he's just absolutely ridiculous. I don't have much to add on his numbers or performance in the bubble. I do have a kind of different question related to Lillard for you. I posed this to a group of friends in a fantasy league, and I was surprised that I got some pushback. But is Lillard the most fun to watch on fire player in the NBA? I think he is. The pushback came largely in the form of Klay Thompson.
See, I might have said it should have came in the form of Steph. Klay Thompson, can you go wrong with one of those choices? It would have to be between.
Not really.
It would have to be between those three, and maybe if you wanted to throw James Harden in there, because he's just had some ridiculous stretches where I feel like his on fireness includes more absurd passing than it would for definitely Klay and Dame, and maybe even for Steph. If you want to pick one of those four, I'd be okay with it. I think I would still go Steph. And maybe he just hasn't played in so long that we've forgotten. I did see on Twitter the other night after Dame destroyed the Mavericks that even though the Blazers barely won, I say he destroyed them. They barely won.
I mean, he destroyed them. The rest of the team did not.
Fair enough. Stephen Curry fans on Twitter were coming out like offended because people were talking about Lillard. We can appreciate the moment and still just acknowledge yeah, Steph's really good. He's the better player overall than me still, but he's not here. He barely played this season. Damian Lillard's been out of his mind, but there's certainly a case because there's just a case because it feels
it's like the level of swagger that comes with the performances too. I feel like, Steph has so much fun and, he'll do his shimmies and turn around while the ball's in the air, but it's different with Dame. It's like he takes everything personally, but in a good way. And then he just wants to rip the opponent's heart out with these deep threes. And I think just the ability to create off the dribble pushes him ahead of Klay. The ability to create without 50 million dribbles pushes him ahead of Harden. And then just the personality with which he plays when he's on fire pushes him ahead of Steph for me.
I think that's fair. There's the the difference between him and Steph might be Steph's is like a huggable bravado when he's on fire, or just his default setting. And I think that also turns some people off because they think he's cocky. Whereas Dame, because he wants to rip the opponent's heart out, it's just easier to like that version of him. And that's totally fine. So you can't go wrong with that decision. But
No,
I think I would still roll Steph. The fact that it's been so long since we've seen that volcanic version of him, though, maybe Lillard's edged him out. All I can say is that if he's in the playoffs, there's just going to be a game against the Lakers. They'll lose in 5, whatever it'll be. But there's going to be a game, because they're not the best 8 seed in NBA history. I don't even remember who said that at this point, but that's absolutely not a fact. I want to make that clear. I hope he has a game where he goes for like 65, because like those moments are just so fun to watch.
100%.
And you know why they might also... Sorry, you know why they might also be better than Steph's? I would still pick Steph. Is there's this feeling that the Blazers actually need those points more than the Warriors would from Steph, because they have Clay. They just had KD. I think we've shown that Dre is going to need stars around him, but guess what? Next year he's going to have stars around him. So I would get that from that perspective as well.
That's a good point. So let's call that our unofficial most flammable player of the bubble award, and continue to roll through our made-up ones, starting with most surprising team.
I had the Suns. Just again, they went undefeated here, and no one expected that. Even though they played the G League version of the Sixers and the Thunder, and then the Heat didn't have Butler or Dragic, I believe, when they played them. But still, less than 1% chance of making the play-in tournament, whatever it was, and you still go almost undefeated, if not undefeated, and you're getting like all these like potential long-term bright spots. It's like, oh, Cameron Johnson is one of the quickest decision makers on the team. So it has to be them for me.
It does. It does have to be the Suns, and they are the objectively correct answer here. So I'm just going to be contrarian just to give some love to the Brooklyn Nets here, because they deserve it. They've gone 5-2. They have a positive net rating with DeAndre Jordan, Spencer Dinwiddie, Taurean Prince, Wilson Chandler, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving all out from their typical rotation, plus signing Jamal Crawford, who only played in 1 game before hurting his hamstring, and signing Michael Beasley, who then tested positive for the coronavirus and opted out. They have a zombie roster, and they're still competitive because they've gotten so many positive contributions from these unheralded players like Timothé Luwawu-Cabarrot, and Karis LeVert has been incredible. What they've done is entirely unexpected, just because they were supposed to be this absolute doormat who were going to like fall back from the 7th seed and, you know, have no business even competing.
Yeah, Karis LeVert is absolutely going to drop 50 in a game against the Raptors. They're not going to win that series. Do you know who almost made my second team? Joe Harris. Averaging over 20 points per game, shooting 57.6% from 3.
He's going to get paid.
Right. He's shooting 2 of 6 from the foul line. He doesn't get there often, but that's just weird. Like, that's just a weird number for the bubble. He's had to guard, and he's always had to do this, defensive assignments that he shouldn't have to. And he's a little bit better than you expect. And I think what people are understanding, it's been like this for basically 2 seasons now, but he can make more decisions with the putting the ball on the floor than people realize. And this is like a tangent, but you brought it up. I'm very curious to see what he gets in free agent, because there are 5 or 6 teams that could have cap space. I don't know the number of them that are actually going to want to use that cap space, particularly with the uncertain future of, are there going to be fans in the stands next season? What's going to happen with that revenue? What's the cap look like? He has to get more than the mid-level, though, right? Like, you're not going to get him for the $10 million per year. The Nets better be the ones to give it to him, because he's like a perfect fit alongside Kyrie, KD, and if you're going to keep Karis LeVert, obviously.
I hope that he does stay there, because that team would be a lot of fun together.
Yeah, but whoever ends up getting him, if it's probably one because they overpaid him, so that's fine. But he actually will be. His next contract might not look great, but he's an impact player, and he almost made my second team.
So he is not on the most disappointing team, but that is our next award. And
it's really an award.
We're in
it's
agreement
like
here. Yeah,
you call it the crap sticker. What is that?
I'm still going to call it an award so that the Pelicans have something to celebrate, I guess, for their bubble play. But yeah, I mean, come on, like it's pretty obviously the New Orleans Pelicans here, where it's the NBA basically like set up this format to try to get Zion Williamson into the playoffs. It didn't work. It didn't work at all.
They were ataxic and lethargic. It was just not even fun to watch, and I'm willing to overlook the Zion Williamson stuff just because he's barely played this year. And as we mentioned in the last podcast, I won't go through it, this has been like a tale of 4 or 6 seasons for him, just based on the stopping and starting. He even had to leave the bubble before he came back to it. But just in the elimination game, or their unofficial elimination game against the Spurs, they just didn't look like they wanted to be there. It was just so bizarre. And Lonzo Ball was riding such a high coming into the bubble, then just absolutely terrible. Drew Holiday and Brandon Ingram didn't look like they were really in attack mode for that last game, and then Brandon Ingram kind of looked like he wasn't really in attack mode following that game they played against the Jazz. So there are just so many weird questions now about their future, which we'll get into actually in a second. A disaster for them in the bubble, because like you said, this was basically set up to get them in there, or they at least looked like they were positioned to get in there, right down to the lineups that they were running out, which does fall on Alvin Gentry, obviously. Just a lot of just what they were doing just made zero sense, from the energy to the actual like functionality of them. Just nothing aligned.
They went from being one of the most fun teams to watch in the regular season to like, oh, we have to watch the Pelicans attempt to play basketball again very quickly.
You're like holding out hope that it would change, but it became clear like after 2 or 3 games that wasn't going to happen.
Right. Yeah, just disappointing. But we are going to give them a second consecutive award, because our next one is the Learn How to Fish Award, which is going to go to the player who has made the playoffs every year until this one, and it's JJ Redick. He has been in the NBA for 14 seasons now, and this is the first time that he will not be participating in the postseason. So just a shout out to JJ Redick. I hope you catch some good fish.
Yeah, look, when you first wrote down this award, by the way, I thought you actually meant fishing, because players were fishing in the bubble. So I was like, well, Ben Simmons is the obvious answer here. But yeah, JJ Redick missing. Do you remember what he told Zion Williamson about his playoff streak at the beginning of the season? Don't fuck it up for me.
Yeah.
And whoops, it wasn't Zion's fault, but that's like, JJ Redick belongs in the playoffs too. That's still just why the Sixers let him go. That's an entire different mess.
Yeah, the other candidate for this award too. I think we thought about it, but weren't confident because of when we're recording this. But it could be the Spurs, because 22 straight playoff appearances could be coming to an end. And no one in that organization has had to fish during the first round for a long time.
But here's the thing, that so many of the players just don't have ties to that streak, really.
Exactly.
Or long-standing ties. It would have to be Greg Popovich, and I'm not picking Greg Popovich without actually seeing the Spurs lose or miss the playoffs, which they probably will miss the playoffs. Still, we know JJ Redick's missing the playoffs as of right now.
Our next award is the Faux-Concern Award, given to the team or player who is engendering some sort of non-belief, but it's not deserved.
Let me go first, because we have to complete the Pelicans trifecta. It's the Pelicans now, because as soon as they were eliminated from the playoffs, it went to, is Zion out of shape? Like, do they have to worry about his conditioning? I still think that's an exaggeration. Like, the dude played fewer than 30 games this year. Like, let's give him a chance. And he actually, when you listen to him, like, you get this, he just talks older than he is. And so I feel like he's going to be fine. The questions that they have to ask, some of them are easier than others. Do we max out Brandon Ingram? You absolutely do, because if you weren't going to keep him, you should have traded him at the deadline. What do you do with Lonzo Ball? He's extension eligible, but this team looks like it has so many mouths to feed on offense. I would personally shop him. Drew Holiday, extension eligible, player option for 2021. I don't think he looks out of place on this team. It depends on how you feel about their ability to compete in the near future. But the fact that he's coming up on free agency and could command more money, that's something you have to think about, because Lonzo Ball is extension eligible, like I said. Josh Hart's extension eligible. You don't want this team to get too costly too quickly. And then if you're going to look at moving Holiday, you're going to have to look at moving JJ Redick. He's going the last year of his contract. If you think Holiday looks out of place, then of course JJ Redick looks out of place. I'm more of the mind, there's Derek Favors is entering free agency. I'm more of the mind you basically run it back. I don't think Derek Favors is the best fit for this team, even though some of the lineups were spectacular, particularly on defense with him. If he's fully healthy and you can get him for a cheap deal, that's fine. I think you need a 5 that can space the floor around Ingram and Zion Williamson long term. And I'm not saying they need to go out there and trade for Miles Turner. If he's available, I'd look into it, but you don't want to give up the farm for him. But I think this team is on the verge of something really special and sustainable. And the biggest change I would make is seeing what you can parlay Lonzo Ball into? Can he be part of a blockbuster package that brings you back a Miles Turner or a high-impact player? Or is it just a matter of, you know what, we need to divest right now? Like, let's see if we can get back picks and prospects for him because he's coming up on a payday. But I'd keep Drew. I'd keep JJ Redick. I'd absolutely keep Josh Hart. I'd look at what it cost to extend him. And yeah, I'd monitor favors. I'd try and get a spacier center. There aren't a ton of those on the open market this year, but imagine Paul Millsap in New Orleans for the mid-level, smaller. Even Marc Gasol, they play really fast, but Marc Gasol's played really fast with Toronto too. And so that could work out. Those are the things that I'd look into, and I don't think we need to relitigate their future. It's still one of the most blindingly bright ones in the NBA.
Yeah, I've made my thoughts clear here on previous episodes that I think you can just entirely run it back. I still have confidence in Jackson Hayes' development. I love what I've seen from Lonzo Ball pre-bubble when he gets to play next to Zion, which should be happening more frequently next season. So I don't have any long-term concerns. I agree that there don't need to be any worries about that right now. That said, my choice for this award was the Lakers. As we are recording this, they have 65 points with 8 minutes left in the third quarter and are losing to the Sacramento Kings. They are already 3-4 in the bubble. They have the worst offensive rating in the bubble. They've been outscored by 5.6 points per 100 possessions. They have had some of their biggest flaws exposed, namely their lack of shot creation ability without LeBron James on the court. The point guard rotation is messy. Anthony Davis has not been able to elevate the team when LeBron isn't on the court with him. And yet, I don't think that we need to be concerned. We've been down this road before so many times with LeBron James's teams where it seems like they're in a decline before the playoffs. It doesn't seem like they're a legitimate contender based on some of the underlying numbers. And then they take it to another level in the playoffs because LeBron is incredible. They're going to figure it out. They have 2 of the top 5 players in basketball on their team. They have a number of legitimate decent role players. Kyle Kuzma has shown significant growth within the bubble. If he can keep shooting like this, they're going to be even better. Just if you're concerned about the Lakers, like, sure, voice the concerns while acknowledging how little they've needed to care about this bubble experience because they've already locked up the number 1 seed and had nothing to play for other than keeping their players healthy and maybe experimenting with some new players and some new rotations. They're going to be fine.
Yeah, and look, I would even view it as, look, for one, I don't think you could be concerned until you have to be, which would be, do they suck in the first round of the playoffs or something? And there's a lot of questions for them because they don't have Avery Bradley. I think Rondo being absent actually helps them even though they need another ball handler. I'm actually almost encouraged because if Kyle Kuzma is going to shoot like this, that helps their team out so much. And he's been defending well too for a good part of the season and also for like a good part of the past 2 seasons. Just hasn't been awful. And now all of a sudden, I'm thinking even longer term. I know people think this is LeBron's best chance at getting a title. I don't disagree, but I might even take it next year if Kyle Kuzma is going to play like this, even with the Warriors returning, because now you have Kyle Kuzma. You're going to have the non-taxpayers mid-level this season. And the idea of adding an impact guy, because you know the Lakers will spend, unlike other teams, on top of Kuzma, LeBron, Anthony Davis, Danny Green, assuming Avery Bradley picks up his player option, they'll still probably be able to afford to keep him even if he doesn't. Like, there's a nice little base there. What this also does for them if Kuzma's going to play like this long term is once you sign him to his next contract, he becomes eminently more tradable because he's a bigger cap hit. And if he's playing really well and teams want him, now all of a sudden you have a more attractive trade piece. And so, yes, I'm thinking far down the line, but that's what people kind of try to parlay these stretches of, should we call them like humanness from LeBron into, like, oh, is this where he's going to finally decline? Let's relax. It's not a problem until it is, and it's not yet a problem.
Agreed. So we have 2 more awards before we wrap up, and both of these are Dan's creations. So I'll let him introduce them.
This one was most likely to send an Alex Jones video to the team group chat. I have Michael Porter Jr.
Yeah, definitely a valid
Michael
choice.
Pizzagate Porter Jr. Excuse me, Pizzagate is real Porter Jr.
Definitely a valid choice. I'm going to go with Terrence Davis from the Toronto Raptors, who the biggest headline that he made in the bubble was cutting a hole in the mask that he was wearing because he believes that coronavirus is a hoax or whatever. And the Raptors had to sit down and have a conversation with him. I think that because he is directly denying the existence or the impact of the pandemic in the controlled bubble environment, whereas Michael Porter is at least following the protocols, he was my choice here.
Dwight was warned like 80 times to put on a mask too, so honorable mention to him. And look, I understand in the case of Terrence Davis and Michael Porter Jr., I want to say younger kids make mistakes, and so, I'm happy there wasn't this level of social media exposure when I was Michael Porter Jr.'s age. I also wasn't saying dumb shit like this, like when it was just so obvious that it was bad. And so I think that you can give their future the benefit of the doubt. Like, hopefully they'll become more informed moving forward, but they absolutely positively deserve to be dragged for these takes. Rudy Gobert, not all opinions are facts. Like, drag him too. I wouldn't put him in the Alex Jones category just yet, though. But Dwight Howard, Terrence Davis, and Michael Porter Jr., like, they deserve the criticism they're getting. I hope this doesn't become...
As we said before the podcast started, it's great that Michael Porter Jr. and Rudy Gobert are going to be playing in the first round. They are, right? That's locked in. I'm not making that up.
Not all opinions are facts, Bol. Yes.
Exactly. Like, whoever loses that series, they're just going to deny the loss.
If it happened in the bubble, did it actually happen?
Exactly. Who knows?
The last award, apparently, or not apparently, so it has some explaining. We call it the Bubble Yum Award. And so anyone who's had Bubble Yum knows that the flavor can be really good for like 30 to 120 seconds, but then it's either bad afterwards or you don't know how it's going to be afterwards. You have to get like a good stick. So this was to target players that were spectacular in hyper-limited playing time. It wasn't to say that they would suck if you gave them more minutes. In fact, the player that I chose played decidedly more minutes in his team's final game of the bubble and fared well. But that's who we were targeting. I went with Chris Boucher, who is just an absolute monster statistically. Early bird restricted free agent, by the way. So there's a cap on how much he could earn, but I'm just interested to see if there's competition for him outside of Toronto. But in the bubble, in 12.2 minutes per game, he averaged 9 points, 4.3 rebounds, 1.2 blocks. He slashed 56.3% from three, and then he shot 70% at the foul line. If anyone cares about what this is going to amount to per minute, he averaged 26.6 points, 12.8 rebounds, 3.4 blocks per 36 minutes. And again, the shooting from three that he's provided, like the release is not the quickest, but their teams are going to leave him open. I want to see him get minutes in the playoffs. Hopefully the Raptors blow out the Nets enough in the first round that we can see him on the floor. But just the level of activity he provides as a shot blocker, put him in your real rotation, Toronto. Like, I know you have Ibaka and Siakam and Marc Gasol, but that needs to be their troll lineup. There it is. Siakam, Gasol, Ibaka, Chris Boucher. Who else can we throw in there? Like,
I just can't wait to see that lineup against the Nuggets super big lineup in the finals.
That
would be great.
That would look. It would, if those two teams make the finals, it has to happen, and we'll cap it off just because we can. We have Hernandez from the Raptors, but I'm just going to throw Stanley Johnson in there because he hit a game winner the other night, and so I think he's 6'8", so that's big enough.
Fair enough. Boucher is a great choice. I'm going to maybe cheat a little bit here. He might have played a little bit too much to be eligible for this non-existent award, but I'm going to go with Robert Williams III, who had a DNP in the first 2 games of the bubble. He played 13 seconds against the Miami Heat and managed to foul 3 times in his first bubble appearance. But then, from that point forward, it's like that motivated him. And he's been fantastic in the next 4 games. While playing 14.8 minutes per game, he's averaged 11.5 points and 4.8 rebounds. He shot 82.6% from the field and 88.9% from the free throw line. Those obviously aren't sustainable numbers, but I think it goes to show just like how effective he's been as a rim runner and roller, while also showing more growth on defense. We've seen flashes from Williams in the past, the Time Lord, on both ends of the court, really, in this limited around the rim role on offense and as a rim protector on defense. But it looks like he's become even more and could have a legitimate role with a Boston team that is trying to figure out what exactly it's going to do with its center rotation come playoff time.
I don't know if you listened to the most recent Low Post, but he called Robert Williams III the Michael Porter Jr. of the East. And I try to be someone who admits when they actually don't know things, because I think one of the problems with NBA Twitter media in general is that we're afraid to admit when we're wrong or that we don't know something. I have not seen nearly enough of Robert Williams III this season to have made that claim. So I went and I was watching clips of him, just random ones from the regular season on plays, and then some of his bubble tape. Holy crap. Like, if the Celtics now luck into, like, they have Tice and Robert Williams III, and it's like, oh, they're just set at center. Like, no cap space, no real, they have some draft equity, but not like high-end draft equity, and you're like, oh, wow. So he looks like he's going to end up being really good, and boy, does that guy have some bounce to him.
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic, like, uber athletic big man conundrum where he fouls a little bit too much to stay on the court. See 3 fouls in 13 seconds.
Well, this is the perfect award for him because it's like, like if Mitchell Robinson was in the bubble, yeah, I want Mitchell Robinson to play 35 minutes a game, but they don't give him 10 fouls. And so that might be a problem.
Yes.
That concludes this first edition. I don't know if it'll be the last edition, given where the state of the coronavirus pandemic will be for next season. But this was our initial and I'm going to say probably not final edition of the Bubble Awards. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the made-up ones. I hope you all enjoyed it as well. Please, pretty please, with sugar on top, remember to subscribe to this podcast and download every episode. If you are using Apple Podcasts or even if you're not, please just go in there, subscribe. It helps us out. Leave a rating and a review. 5 stars only, please. Any constructive criticism is fine. Seriously, we take it all under advisement. We're reading it. Help us out on YouTube as well. We're trying to build up that account. YouTube.com, search Hardwood Knocks, just subscribe. And our podcasts are on there if you want to listen to it there. Again, if you don't, still just subscribing and liking our videos helps a ton. Follow us on Twitter at Hardwood Knocks, also at NBA_math, fantastic account where you're going to get even more statistics than you do from us. We try and blend personality with stats, with context, with anecdotes, with whatever. And so we do try to make this a comprehensive, well-rounded podcast, and I think we've done a good job thus far. But if you have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, leave me alone. Hit Adam on Twitter at Frommel09. Just kidding about leaving me alone. I love you all. At Dan Favale, Favale. Until next time, we leave you with the shout-out to the one, the only, the Bubble Yum Award winners, Chris Boucher and Robert Williams III.